Jack's world shattered the moment the truck tires kicked up dust and then vanished down the rugged dirt road, leaving him and his little sister, Penny, swallowed by the thick, unforgiving forest. At just 7 years old, with a broken arm that throbbed painfully, Jack suddenly found himself cast into a cruel wilderness, not just of trees and shadows, but of abandonment and desperate survival. The towering pines seemed indifferent to their plight, their whispering needles masking the cold truth: they were utterly alone. The journey into the forest was no accidental wandering, it was a deliberate exile by the very person who was supposed to protect them. Their foster father, Raymond, had vanished with a bitter promise never to return, leaving behind only a whispered threat and the echo of cruelty that had long haunted their small lives. Jack's heart pounded not only from pain but from a fierce, unyielding resolve. He knew the forest could swallow them whole if they lost hope, but he also understood that he was now the sole guardian of Penny, only 4 years old, whose small hands clung to his torn jacket as if he were their last anchor to safety. Every step was agony, his fractured arm a constant reminder of their fragility, yet Jack pushed forward, drawing on a hidden well of courage he never knew he possessed. The forest's canopy closed overhead like a cage, but the boy pressed onward, weaving through tangled roots and thick underbrush, every sense alert to the dangers lurking just beyond sight. Night fell swiftly, the cold creeping in with a cruel bite, but Jack fashioned a crude shelter from fallen branches and leaves, wrapping Penny in a threadbare blanket. His lips whispered promises, faint and trembling, that they would survive, that they would find help, that he would protect her no matter what. As hours blurred into a haunting stillness, Jack's thoughts flickered between despair and determination. The pain in his arm gnawed at his concentration, but his gaze never wavered from Penny's pale face, illuminated by the faint moonlight. He told stories softly, weaving memories of happier days to keep her spirit alive, even as his own hope teetered on the edge of collapse. This was no longer a child's game of survival, it was a battle of wills against nature's vast indifference and the betrayal of those sworn to care. But deep within, the spark of a hero's journey was igniting. Abandoned, battered, and terrified, Jack was about to embark on a transformation far greater than he could comprehend, a test of endurance, love, and the unbreakable bond between siblings. The forest was vast and merciless, but within its shadows lay the first steps toward their salvation, and Jack was ready to face whatever darkness awaited. The dawn broke cold and gray, casting pale light through the dense canopy as Jack hoisted Penny onto his back, the weight both a burden and a beacon of purpose. Each breath came ragged, the forest air thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, but Jack refused to yield to exhaustion or despair. Their days became a relentless rhythm of cautious steps and whispered plans, each moment steeped in the desperate urgency to survive and escape the shadow of abandonment that clung to them like a second skin. Jack learned quickly that the forest was no friend. It was a labyrinth of dangers, hidden roots that twisted beneath his feet, thorns that tore at their skin, and the ever-present threat of wild animals prowling in the underbrush. Hunger gnawed at their bellies, a relentless ache that sharpened Jack's senses and forced him to scavenge with a hunter's instinct. Berries, roots, the occasional small bird or rabbit, whatever could be found became their fragile lifeline. Every meal was a victory, every clean drop of water a miracle snatched from the indifferent wilderness. At night, the cold pressed against them like a living thing. Jack huddled close to Penny, wrapping his thin jacket around her small frame, whispering stories to keep the terror at bay. Sleep was scarce and fragmented, the forest's eerie symphony of hoots, rustles, and distant growls kept his senses on edge. Yet even in the darkest hours, his resolve hardened. The boy who had been broken by betrayal was slowly forging himself into a protector, a leader, not just for Penny, but for himself. Their days blurred into one another, marked only by the shifting sun and the slow, grinding pain in Jack's injured arm. He learned to move carefully, to avoid places that felt unsafe, and to read the signs of the forest like a map, a broken branch here, a cluster of animal tracks there. The forest became a teacher of survival, harsh and unforgiving, but its lessons etched themselves deep into Jack's heart. There were moments when despair clawed at him, when the silence between them seemed too heavy to bear, and the weight of their situation threatened to crush the fragile hope flickering inside. But each time, Penny's wide, trusting eyes reminded him of the stakes, of the life he was fighting to preserve. He imagined a world beyond the trees, a place where they could be safe again, where the scars of betrayal might one day fade. That vision fueled him, a steady flame against the growing darkness. Slowly, Jack's spirit shifted from mere survival to a quiet defiance. They were not just lost children in a wilderness, they were warriors in their own right, carving out a fragile existence against the odds. The forest tested them relentlessly, but it could not break the bond between them, their shared courage, their shared will to live. And so, with each passing day, Jack pushed deeper into the unknown, driven by a promise whispered in the quiet moments: no matter what, he would find a way to bring Penny home. Before the forest became Jack's crucible, before the betrayal carved its cruel mark upon his young heart, there was a home, one that promised safety but delivered only shadows and silence. The foster family was meant to be a refuge, a chance for a broken boy and his sister to rebuild what was lost, but instead it became a prison of quiet torment and hidden wounds. Jack's earliest memories were filled with the hollow echoes of unspoken pain, the cold glance of foster father Raymond who ruled their lives with a clenched fist and a hardened heart. His mother had vanished from their world long ago, leaving behind a silence that swallowed every cry for help. Jack learned quickly that love was a fragile thing, one easily broken by neglect and cruelty. Raymond's promises were empty words masked by a smile too tight to be true. The house they lived in was large and cold, its walls echoing with the quiet suffering of two children forced to endure. Penny, small and wide-eyed, clung to Jack with a trust that weighed heavily on his shoulders, because he knew the pain she didn't yet understand. Nights were the hardest. The whisper of Raymond's anger, the sharpness of his words, the cold nights spent curled up on the floor instead of a bed, these were the shadows Jack carried within. Yet amidst this bleakness, Jack's spirit simmered with a quiet defiance. He held on to scraps of hope like precious gems, a kind word from a neighbor, a fleeting smile from a teacher, the warmth of Penny's small hand in his own. These small lights in the darkness reminded him that the world beyond the foster home might still hold something better. But the wounds ran deep. Betrayal wasn't just the forest's cruel gift, it was planted long ago in the very place where they should have found shelter. The turning point came one bitter evening when Raymond's anger boiled over, a storm unleashed that shattered whatever fragile peace they had left. Jack's fractured arm was not an accident but a violent reminder of the harshness that ruled their days. In that moment, with Penny's frightened sobs ringing in his ears, Jack realized that escape was no longer a choice, it was the only path to survival. The forest, with all its dangers and unknowns, was a promise of freedom, a challenge that Jack accepted with trembling hands and a fierce heart. Looking back now, Jack understood that his painful past had forged him in ways he hadn't fully grasped before. The foster home was a shadow that chased him into the forest, but it was also the crucible that tempered his resolve. Each scar, each tear, each silent night had become part of the story he was writing with every step forward. The journey ahead was daunting, but Jack carried within him a fire kindled by hardship and a love fierce enough to defy the darkness. This past was no longer just a memory, it was the foundation of the hero he was becoming. Days had bled into nights, and nights back into days, a seamless cycle of struggle and endurance beneath the oppressive canopy of the forest. Jack's steps were heavy with fatigue, his body a map of aches and bruises, yet it was the shadow of uncertainty that weighed most on his heart. Penny clung to him with quiet trust, her small hands clutching his ragged jacket as they pushed forward into the unknown. Just as the forest seemed to close in, thickening around them like a living wall, fate intervened in the form of a distant sound, a faint crunch of footsteps over dry leaves, soft but deliberate. Jack froze, heart hammering. The forest had been a vast, empty prison until now. The sound was a whisper of hope or a herald of danger, he could not tell. Clutching Penny closer, he stepped behind a gnarled tree, peering cautiously through the underbrush. A figure emerged, a man, weathered and steady, his eyes sharp with kindness and experience. He moved not like a hunter but like someone who belonged to the wild, a guardian rather than a threat. "Hey there," the man called softly, lowering his voice. "You kids all right?" His tone was gentle, edged with concern but without judgment. Jack's first instinct was suspicion. Years of pain and betrayal had taught him that kindness could be a trap. Yet, something in the man's steady gaze sparked a fragile hope. "I'm Jack," he said cautiously, his voice hoarse but firm. "This is Penny. We're lost." The words hung between them, a confession and a plea. The man nodded slowly, as if he understood more than words could say. "I'm Tom," he replied. "I work with the forest rescue team. You're lucky I found you when I did." Tom moved with purposeful ease, pulling from his backpack a small canteen of water and some dried food. Jack's hands trembled as he accepted the gifts, Penny's eyes wide with cautious wonder. It was the first time in weeks they had felt something close to safety, and yet the journey was far from over. Tom's presence was a promise, not a guarantee. Over the next hours, Tom led them along hidden trails, places where the sun filtered through the trees like golden threads. He spoke little, but each word was measured, each gesture deliberate, building a bridge of trust between the lost children and the guardian who had come to their aid. Jack listened intently, absorbing lessons about the forest's rhythms, how to find clean water, where to shelter from storms. The forest was still wild, still full of peril, but with Tom, it became a place of cautious possibility. As the daylight waned, Tom's talk turned toward what lay ahead, a safe haven, people who could help, a chance for healing. For the first time, Jack allowed himself to believe in that future, a life beyond the shadows. Yet he knew the scars of their past would not vanish overnight. The road to recovery was long, paved with challenges both seen and unseen. That night, beneath a canopy of stars, Jack lay awake beside Penny, the sounds of the forest softened by the presence of their rescuer. The cold had not lifted, but the chill in Jack's heart was tempered by a new resolve. He was no longer alone. The forest had tested him, broken him, but it had also led him here, to a moment of salvation, to a chance to become more than the boy abandoned in the dark. In Tom's steady presence, Jack found the first flicker of hope, the spark that would ignite the rest of his journey, the path from survival to renewal, from lost to found. The journey out of the forest was a battle fought step by step, the fragile thread of hope stretched taut between exhaustion and relief. Tom's rescue team was already mobilized, their coordinated movements precise and purposeful, like a well-rehearsed dance in the heart of chaos. As they emerged from the dense foliage, Jack felt the sharp sting of sunlight piercing through the canopy, a harsh reminder of the world beyond the wilderness, a world that still held both salvation and judgment. The team's voices were calm but urgent, radios crackling with updates, their eyes scanning for dangers unseen by those who had never known the forest's cruel embrace. Jack's body betrayed the ordeal, his fractured arm was swollen and bruised, the cuts and scrapes raw reminders of each desperate step he had taken. Penny's cheeks, once flushed with the innocence of childhood, were smeared with dirt and tears, her small frame trembling but unbroken. The medical tent was a sanctuary, pitched on a clearing bathed in the golden light of late afternoon, surrounded by towering trees that seemed to lean in with silent watchfulness. The rescue workers moved with practiced efficiency, their hands gentle but firm as they lifted the children onto stretchers and began urgent triage. Inside the tent, the sterile smell of antiseptic mingled with the earthy scent of the forest, a strange convergence of two worlds. Jack's senses sharpened despite the fog of pain, every detail etched into memory, the quick clink of medical instruments, the hushed voices of paramedics, the soft rustling of bandages as wounds were cleaned and dressed. The fractured arm was carefully set and splinted, a dull ache settling in as the initial shock wore off. Penny was wrapped in a warm blanket, her small body quiet now, eyes heavy with fatigue but safe. Tom stayed close, a steady presence amid the controlled chaos. His voice was low and reassuring, speaking in soft tones to both children, weaving a fragile thread of comfort. He explained the steps ahead, hospital care, recovery, and, most importantly, a chance to heal not just their bodies but the deeper scars left by years of neglect and fear. The promise of medical treatment was a beacon in the darkness, yet Jack's thoughts wandered beyond the physical. Healing was more than mending bones, it was reclaiming a life stolen by cruelty, learning to trust again, and discovering strength where there had only been despair. As night fell, the camp settled into a quiet vigilance. Jack lay on a cot, the pain in his arm a constant reminder of his ordeal, but beneath it, a stronger fire burned, a determination to rise, to fight for a future brighter than the shadows behind him. Penny's soft breathing beside him was a tether to hope, a reminder that they were not alone anymore. The rescuer's dedication was the bridge between what had been and what could be, a path forged through compassion, courage, and the unyielding human spirit. In this sanctuary, amid the sounds of whispered prayers and the rustling of leaves outside, Jack realized that the rescue was more than an end, it was the beginning. The journey from lost and broken to healed and whole had begun. And though the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, he knew now that he carried within him the strength of every step taken through the forest, the resilience born of survival, and the unwavering hope that comes with being found. The days following the rescue were a whirlwind, a storm of official voices and hurried footsteps that collided with the fragile calm Jack and Penny had begun to grasp. The clearing that had been their sanctuary transformed into a hive of activity, social workers with soft eyes but firm resolve, police officers with notebooks and badges, each playing their part in a drama larger than the forest itself. For Jack, the sudden invasion of this structured world was overwhelming, a blur of questions, paperwork, and unfamiliar faces, yet beneath it all lay a deeper current of hope and uncertainty. The social worker, a woman named Elaine, entered their lives with a gentle but unyielding presence. She spoke to Jack and Penny with care, her voice a steady anchor as she asked about their journey, their needs, their fears. There was no rush in her questions, only the quiet insistence that their stories be heard and believed. Jack watched as Penny clung to her side, the little girl's trust tentative but growing. Elaine's role was more than bureaucratic, she was a lifeline, a promise that their voices mattered in a world that had often ignored them. The police arrived with an urgency born of duty and the need for answers. Detective Morales was a man whose eyes had seen too much sorrow but still held a flicker of hope. He listened intently to Jack's fractured tale, piecing together the timeline of abandonment and survival. Each detail was a key to unlocking the truth hidden beneath years of neglect. The detective's questions were precise, yet never cruel, and in his presence, Jack felt the weight of his ordeal begin to lift, replaced by a cautious belief that justice might be within reach. Together, the social services and police formed an uneasy alliance, their missions intertwined yet distinct. The police sought to uncover the failures that had led to Jack and Penny's abandonment, to hold accountable those who had turned away when help was needed most. The social workers focused on healing, on creating a safe space where the children could begin to rebuild their lives. For Jack, this dual process was both daunting and necessary, a confrontation with the past and a step toward the future. Interviews were conducted in sterile rooms far removed from the forest's wildness, but within those walls, Jack and Penny found fragments of safety. They were encouraged to speak, to share memories both painful and precious, guided by voices that sought to understand rather than judge. Jack's heart ached with the burden of truth, but as each day passed, he grew stronger, bolstered by the unwavering support around him. The community responded with a mixture of shock and compassion. News of the children's ordeal spread through local media, stirring public outcry and calls for reform. Volunteers offered clothes, food, and kindness, reminders that even in darkness, light could be found. Yet beneath the surface, Jack knew that the journey ahead would be long, there were battles to fight, systems to navigate, and wounds to heal that no single act of charity could mend. At night, as Jack lay in his hospital bed, the shadows cast by the hospital's fluorescent lights felt less oppressive. The presence of the social workers and police was a shield, a testament that they were no longer invisible. The forest had been their crucible, testing their will and spirit, but now the broader world was watching, ready to catch them if they fell. The road to recovery stretched out before them, uncertain, demanding, but filled with the promise that their voices, once silenced, would now be heard. In this convergence of law, care, and community, Jack realized the true meaning of rescue was more than survival, it was reclaiming dignity, justice, and hope. The journey from darkness to light was far from over, but the first steps had been taken, guided by those who chose to see, to listen, and to act. The first light of dawn filtered gently through the hospital window, casting soft shadows on the sterile walls that had become Jack's temporary refuge. Each breath he took was a reminder of survival, the ache in his arm a testament to the trials endured and the strength he had yet to fully realize. Recovery was no simple passage of time, it was a crucible that forged resilience from pain, hope from despair. With Penny quietly resting beside him, the weight of their shared journey settled into a new purpose, not just to heal, but to reclaim a life stolen by neglect and fear. Every day brought small victories, the slow return of strength in Jack's arm, the first smiles that broke through Penny's guarded silence, the moments when laughter, fragile and hesitant, began to fill the sterile air. The hospital staff became guides on this path, their steady hands and gentle encouragement illuminating the way forward. Physical wounds were tended with medicine and care, but it was the unseen fractures, the distrust, the fear, the sense of abandonment, that required a different kind of healing, a longer journey inward. Therapy sessions introduced Jack and Penny to voices that understood pain, professionals who listened not just to their words but to the silences between them. These moments of reflection were as much a battle as the escape from the forest, challenging the scars etched deep within their hearts. Yet with every step taken in this new terrain, Jack felt the burden lighten, replaced by a growing conviction that survival was only the beginning, and that life's true journey lay in rediscovery and renewal. Outside the hospital walls, a network of support began to weave itself around the siblings. Social workers connected them to community resources, schools, counseling, safe housing, and volunteers who brought warmth and kindness, bridging the gap between past neglect and future possibility. Though the shadows of their ordeal lingered, these connections offered a fragile but real thread of belonging. Jack found in this community a mirror reflecting his own hope, a promise that they were no longer alone in their fight. As weeks turned to months, the prospect of the future transformed from a distant dream into a tangible horizon. Jack envisioned a life where Penny could attend school without fear, where both could build trust in those around them, and where the scars of the past became chapters in a story of strength rather than defeat. Plans were made, education, therapy, perhaps even a new home, each a step toward stability and growth. The journey ahead remained steep and uncertain, but it was a path chosen with eyes open and hearts determined. In quiet moments, Jack reflected on the forest, the darkness that had tested every fiber of his being, the silence that had almost swallowed their cries. That wilderness was no longer just a place of despair but a symbol of endurance, a reminder of the strength found when all seemed lost. The rescue had been a turning point, but recovery was the true hero's path, one walked not alone but alongside those who refused to let them fall. As the seasons changed outside the hospital window, so too did Jack and Penny evolve, emerging from shadows into light, from brokenness into wholeness. Their story was still unfolding, a testament to the human spirit's capacity to heal and hope. The future was no longer a vague promise but a horizon toward which they stepped boldly, carrying the lessons of the past and the courage to face whatever lay ahead.